In this video, I'm going to show you how to cut Smalti using your double wheeled nippers, and I'm also going to show you how to cut vitreous tiles. And along the way, I'm also going to share with you some tips to make it easier when using both those materials. And I'm going to show you those right now. I've been asked numerous times, can you use double wheeled nippers to cut Smalti? And if so, how? Well, the short answer to that is yes, you can. I've also been asked about cutting vitreous tiles. So what I thought I would do is combine both those products into this one video and show you how I cut them. I'm going to be using a pair of double wheeled nippers, a pair of scorer breakers, protective eyewear, which is a must, a protective mask, which is going to be rated either N95 or P2, and I'll put a link up top of the video to show you why I use those particular masks, a small range of Smalti, and also vitreous tiles. So let's get into it and I'll show you how I cut them. If you're going to be cutting Smalti with double wheeled nippers, cut with small pieces of Smalti. Don't use the very large piece of Smalti or the pizza size slices of Smalti, because they're just too hard for double wheeled nippers. If you're going to be cutting those larger pieces, then use a hammer and hardy, like the one that I have up on screen now. They are great, they're a specialist tool, and they are great for cutting a large piece of Smalti, and they give you quite finite control. So for smaller pieces, when you're using double wheeled nippers, anything at all, this size, all I do is I just put it in between the jaws of the double wheeled nippers and I hold it like that and then cut. That's really all there is to it. That will give you your small pieces. However, if you want to create some texture on it, like this type of, I hope you can see that, where the reflection is, this type of area here, you know, when you're seeing Smalti piece and there's lots of texture, you can create it in a small way with the double wheeled nippers, and that is that I put it that way into the jaws. Of course, you can only do it to the width of the jaws. And then I put it on an angle and then I just push down. And what that does is it basically chips the Smalti, and I hope you can see the reflections on that, and you can create some wonderful textures doing that. Now, normally that can be done with a hammer and hardy quite easily. But with small pieces of Smalti, with the double wheeled nippers, you can achieve a very similar result by doing it that way. And that just really gives you a wonderful texture. Just lay those up there. That just gives you a really wonderful texture and really good reflections when you're using a Smalti, because when you kind of chip it, it's a very smooth finish, and you know, when it reflects the light, it looks wonderful. So that's all I do when I'm using the double wheeled nippers. I just use these, cut them in half, like that. And that can also give you some texture in its own. But like I say, you can put it in an angle like that and really give you some wonderful textures here. You know, you're creating your own. So that's what I do for the Smalti. Now, when it comes to, and even on these, with these larger pieces, they're quite large, and yes, you can cut them, you know, across ways like that. But what I do with these ones is, I do it on the smooth side. I just put the scorer breaker, the scorer part on the edge there, and I'm going to go up to the end in one smooth motion. So you go from start to finish in one smooth motion. Now I'll try and turn that around so you can see it. Hope you can see it. And we push down on it a little bit. And you hear that score line. And then we put the Smalti where the score mark is into the jaws. And we put the actual, that area there, which is going to push, or which is going to go underneath the score line. And then these two pieces here will push down on either side, and it will break the Smalti in half, like that. So then, if you want to, you can then use your double wheeled nippers then to break it down from there. Now that's going to be too wide to put into the jaws, but this piece might be all right. Nope, that's going to be too wide as well. So you're going to have to take that into consideration. If you're going to be cutting it in two, oh, there you go, nice chip there. That's what you do. There you go. And that will give you that beautiful reflection and those textures in the Smalti. So that's how I break them down, and you can get some wonderful Smalti, different colours, absolutely stunning it is. And I'll put a link in the description box where I get my Smalti from. Now when you're looking at cutting vitreous tiles, and I'll move these out the way. Now when you're using cutting vitreous tiles, you will notice that there's ridges on the underside. Now some people actually put the ridges on the top, but the ridges theoretically should really go on the bottom. Now if you were to cut the vitreous tile like that, where you're following the ridges, you're very limited in how, in the width that you can cut, because your double-wheeled nippers, the blades, will want to go into the grooves. So what I do is I turn it around and cut against the grooves. That gives you a lot better finite control. So now if I'm doing this, I would put it where I want. Let's say we'll cut there. And again, oops, dropped out. Now, when I'm doing this, I want to keep it level. Okay, so it's going to be level with it. And I'm going to want to grab hold of it so as I don't tilt it. So I'm going to keep the vitreous tile firmly within the jaws so as I get a fairly good parallel cut. So I grab it like that, or you can do it like that, but on vitreous tiles I tend to grab both sides and then cut it. And that gives you a lot better control. And then you can again, you can take it down further, but now you're going to be looking at going into those grooves. So if you're going to go in the centre, let's go about there, which is going to be on top of one of those grooves because it wants to go into those grooves. So that's not actually going to be, that one there is actually not going to give you a centre cut. It's going to be a bit off. So what you need to do is put it on top of one of those grooves, the blade of the cutter. Gee, I hope this is making sense. Now, so the blades don't go either side of the grooves. You need to grab hold of it, and you can do it that way or that way, but you need to grab hold of it firmly so as the blades are not going to want to go into one of the grooves and then push down. And that will give you a fairly, okay, a little bit rough, but that gives you a fairly good line to work with. If you were going to go with the grooves, it's not going to be centre, so therefore you get that happening, where one's going to be wider than the other, which is also fine. There's no issue with that, but if you're trying to get a nice even lines, then I find going the opposite direction of the grooves, I'll turn that up there so you can see it. Let's put in the centre there. Will give you a nice, fairly good cut every time. And that can be fairly difficult when you're shaping vitreous tiles because your nippers want to go into those grooves in there. But you can still shape them. But you just have to allow for the actual nippers to go into those lines. So you have to hold it firmly because you're going to actually control where you want those nippers to cut. And then you can then just round it off a little bit at a time, just gradual nips. And that will give you a much better curve. It's a matter of taking small pieces off, but sometimes when you're using vitreous tiles, your nippers, as I said, the blades tend to go into the curves, into the lines, and that can disrupt your cutting path. So I find cutting against those curves works best for me. But of course, everyone has their different ways of cutting. This is just my way of doing it. And the other thing is, before I go, is when you cut your pieces down and you've got some left over, put them into a ziplock bag. Even if you have individual colours, where you might want to use those later, You can put them into there, and then you can then put them into your container. So you've got your full pieces in there, and then you've got your cut pieces in here. So if you need to go for any of these later, you don't have to fossick around in that container, and also you've got them in that little bag that you can add more to or use those if you want to. So I find that works really well for me. And I also mark where I get the Viterous tiles from and the code number that's on the company's website, because that allows me to then reorder exactly the same tiles. Might be a different batch, slight colour, but that allows me to order the same tiles knowing where I've got them from. So always mark your containers with a label, even if you handwrite it on a piece of sticky tape, because you can then peel the sticky tape off. If you put it on the lid, you can change lids, and so therefore your tiles may not be accurately marked. But if you mark it on the side of the container, that allows you then to reorder easily and to not get that label mixed up with some other container. You can also put the different colours, if you have different shades of colours, in a bag. So as you know, these are going to be your blues and whites or other colours that might work in with it, like some greens. So I find that works well too. And that saves you going for individual, looking for individual colours into a container when you've got a nice lot of colours in one bag. And then you can then put them in a container like this one or this one, whatever you prefer. But that's just some of the things I do to make it easier for me and to create those different textures with your Smalti if you don't have a hammer and hardy. And they're just a few of the ways that I cut the Viterous tiles to make it easier for me. So I hope that's helped you. I hope you've taken something away from that. If you have any comments or anything, leave them down at in the comments section of YouTube. And I'll see you in the next one. Enjoy.